The Last Call. Chapter 1. The Message in the Secretary. The days in Raul Santini's retirement were a monotonous shadow of the agitated past he used to have. After 30-5 years in the police, he had gotten used to the adrenaline, mysteries, and the sleepless nights. But now, the most exciting sound in his routine was the low whistle, announcing another coffee that he would drink alone in an empty kitchen. That morning, however, something broke the calm. As he passed the room, he noticed the red light flashing from the secretary, who still used that. Since leaving the badge, he has disconnected from people, friends by profession, even the family who lived in another city. With an eyebrow raised with curiosity, he pressed the playback button. Santini? The voice was weak, hesitant. He felt something strange in his stomach. If you're still there, you're still the same man who never gives up. Madalena's case is not over. I found out who it was. But you won't like what I have to say. There was a break, followed by a forced cough, as if the person on the other side was hiding pain or fear. Find me at the bar from Rua 23 at 8. Only then will you know the truth. The sound of the click was drowned out by the silence that took over the room. Raul stood, staring at the device as if he were exploding. Madalena. That name always came with an overwhelming weight in the chest. This was the case that never closed, the ghost that had haunted him for over 10 years. A 25-year-old girl missing under inexplicable circumstances, the body never found, suspected everywhere, but no concrete clue. He had promised her mother that she would solve, but it failed. The memories began to flood your mind, bringing back faces, places, dialogues, a puzzle with pieces always missing. Now someone came from the shadows, offering one last track. But who would it be? Why now after so long? And more importantly, what meant that last sentence? You won't like what I have to say? Without realizing it, Raul was already taking his coat and keys. He knew he couldn't let it go. His still sharp mind of detective tried to keep his calm, but his heart throbbed faster than he should. He was ready to face whatever was needed, but a small inner voice whispered something he didn't dare to admit. This final track could not only solve the case but to destroy the little piece he had built. 8 hours. The 23 Street Bar. Was the truth waiting for him, but was it really prepared to discover it? Did you like the beginning? Curious to know what will happen at the meeting? Subscribe and share so as not to lose the unfolding of this story. The bar. The air was heavy that night. A thin layer of fog hovered over the streets, giving the city an almost surreal atmosphere. Raul was walking towards the 23 Rua Bar, an old and forgotten place, like so many other corners of the city who had seen better days. The cold wind cut his face as he approached, and a strange feeling of déjà vu surrounded him. He had been there before many years ago on an equally dark night. Pushing the heavy door of the bar, it was received by a dark, fuss-smelling and the acre smell of tobacco. The place was almost empty, except for some lonely figures scattered around the tables. The sound of an old television whispered in the background, while an elderly bartender wiped the glasses with methodical slowness. Raul hesitated for a moment, his eyes sweeping the place in search of any sign of who had left that message on the secretary. He chose a table in the corner where he could see the entrance and the counter and waited. Minutes passed and nothing. He began to wonder if this was a bad joke, a prank? But something in the tone of the voice in the recording said the opposite. It was not a simple trick. There was truth in that message, and he knew that. After almost half an hour, when Raul was starting to consider the idea of getting up and leaving, the bar door opened slowly. A slender figure entered, wrapped in a dark coat. He couldn't see the person's face, but something in their posture made him straighten in his chair. The figure walked toward him, slow, almost calculated steps. Santini? Asked the figure, removing the hood to reveal a face that Raul did not recognize immediately. She was a woman, her eyes looked tired, as if she carried an invisible burden. Who are you? He asked, his voice low and firm. The woman sat in front of her, pulling a chair with a soft movement. She looked straight into his eyes, and it was at this moment that Raul felt the first evidence of real discomfort. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I know who took Madalena out of you, she said with a sharp tone. Raul was silent for a second, processing what she had just said. His chest began to squeeze. He knew this meeting could reveal something disturbing, but this initial phrase was too much. Oh, he asked, trying to control the tone of his voice. She looked around as if she was making sure no one else was listening before whispering. The truth is closer than you think. Are you ready to know who is behind the mystery? Subscribe and share to find out what will come next. Chapter 3. The Warning. Raul stared at the woman in front of her, her mind spinning with the implications of what she had just said. The truth is closer than you think. He felt a shiver up the spine as if his own air around him had changed his temperature. What do you mean by that? He tried to stay calm, but his voice came out a little tense than he intended. The woman leaned on her chair, crossing her arms as if she was preparing for a long conversation. Madalena's case has never been resolved because someone very close to you has made a point of burying you. Her eyes spotted with something that looked like a mixture of anger and pain. And that person knew exactly how to manipulate each piece, every step you took in the investigation. Raul felt his heart accelerate. He had revised that case so many times, analyzed each movement, every track. But the idea that someone so close has manipulated him? This made no sense. He was always careful, especially in this case. So how? Are you telling me that one of my own colleagues was behind it? Her voice came out severe, loaded with a mixture of unbelief and suspicion. Not just a colleague. She leaned forward, her dark expression. A friend. The word hit him like a punch in the stomach. Raul had few friends inside the police force, and the ones he kept were people he trusted with his life. The idea of betrayal from within, someone he called a friend, was almost unbearable. This is not possible. He shook his head, trying to push his thoughts away. Tell me who it is. Say who did it. The woman sighed, as if heavy with the truth she was about to reveal. She took a piece of paper from her coat pocket and slid him down the table to Raul. With trembling fingers, he took the paper and opened. The name written there in simple letters made his blood freeze. Luiz Teixeira. Luiz? Raul whispered, barely believing what he saw. Luiz was his partner at the time of the case of Madalena. The two had worked side by side, nights and nights trying to resolve the disappearance. Luiz was the person with whom he shared all the discoveries, all the details. The woman nodded slowly. He deceived you, Santini. He was behind it all the time. He manipulated the investigation to ensure that Madalena was never found. Raul was still, the name of Luiz echoing in his head like a drum. Each memory, every conversation, every fake track, it all started to fit in a terrible way. But why? Raul asked, his weak voice. Why would he do that? The woman hesitated for a moment before finally answering. Because Madalena knew too much. And Luiz had secrets that he could not allow them to come to light. Raul felt his world crumble. He always knew that the case of Madalena had hidden layers, but never imagined that her own life, her confidence, would be part of the riddle. Now the betrayal seemed more bitter than any work failure. And he knew that from that moment on, nothing more would be the same. Intrigued by the turnaround? Don't miss the next chapter to discover the dark secrets behind the investigation. Share and subscribe to accompany the outcome. Chapter 4. Reunion. The walk back home seemed endless. Luiz's name burned in the mind of Raul as an open wound. Every step he took was heavy, as if the floor was sinking under his feet. How did he not see that? How could he have been so blind? Arriving home, Raul threw himself on the couch, his body exhausted not only for the walk, but for the emotional weight that consumed him. He looked at the still on the electronic secretary, and the echo of the woman's voice sounded in her mind. Madalena's case always haunted him, but now it looked like a scar that would never close. He would need to face Luiz. There was no other way. But how to do this without losing control? After all, Luiz was more than a co-worker. Luiz was the godfather of his son, the friend who helped him in the most difficult times in life. If it were true, how would he deal with it? Decided to go to the end, Raul took the phone. He hesitated for a moment, Luiz's number recorded in his mind like an old memory. Finally he died. Hello? Luiz's family voice sounded on the other side as if nothing had changed. Raul tried to keep his voice firm, but an involuntary tremor escaped. Luiz, we need to talk. Now. Santini? Luiz sounded confused. Of course I'm home. What happened? Raul felt his stomach turn. How could your old friend act so normally? He hung up without saying anything else and left towards Luiz's house. There was no return. He would need to look into Luiz's eyes and demand the truth. Upon arrival, Luiz received him with a warm smile, but Raul could not fail to notice the slight trace of concern on his face. He has always been a good observer. What's going on, Raul? You look nervous. Raul closed the door behind him and stared at the old friend. His eyes narrowed, and he saw something on Luiz's face that he had never noticed before. Something dark, something that until that moment he preferred to ignore. "Tell me it's not true, Luiz," Raul whispered. "Tell me you weren't behind it all." The silence that followed was long and terrible, the kind of silence that makes the heart stop beating for a second. Luiz said nothing, but the look he gave was enough for Raul to know the truth. What Luiz hides. Want to know more about the terrible truth? Subscribe and share so as not to lose the unfolding of this mystery. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. Raul was paralyzed for a moment, staring at his friend's face of a lifetime, now loaded with a silence that confirmed his worst suspicions. Luiz, his partner Leo, whom he trusted everything, was involved in Madalena's disappearance. The floor seemed to open under his feet, but Raul knew he couldn't weak at that moment. He needed answers, needed to understand how it all happened. "How could you do that?" Raul asked, his voice hesitant. "How could you betray me that way after all?" Luiz sighed, the weight of guilt finally reflected in his eyes. He did not try to deny or offer a ready excuse. Instead, he crossed his arms as if he were seeking strength to confess. "It was not meant to be so," he began, his voice hoarse as if every word hurt him. "I never wanted to get you involved, Raul. You were the only true friend I had. But when I realized that Magdalene knew too much, it was late." Raul frowned, confused. "Did you know too much? What are you saying?" Luiz began walking around the room, restless as he tried to find the right words. "Magdalene worked for a very influential person in the city, Raul. A person you would never suspect. She had information about things that couldn't surface. If she spoke, many powerful would fall. I was involved in some schemes, I admit, but I didn't think things were so far. I just wanted to keep everything under control, ensuring that dirt would not go out to the public." Raul could barely believe what he was hearing. He always knew that Magdalene's disappearance involved something big, but the magnitude of what Luiz was suggesting left him stunned. "And you? Did you help cover it up?" Raul asked, the increasingly incredulous tone. "Did you disrupt the investigation?" "It was more than that," Luiz murmured with a distant gaze. "I had to make sure she was never found." Raul felt his nausea rise. Now everything made sense. The clues that never carried anywhere, the information that always seemed to be one step ahead of him. Luiz had manipulated everything from the beginning. "Did you kill her?" Raul asked once again, his voice almost inaudible. Luiz shook his head tightly as if the question hit him directly on his chest. "No, I would never do that. But..." He hesitated, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I knew who I would, and I let it happen." Raul could not process the coldness of confession. The friend he trusted with his own life had allowed a young woman to be killed, all to protect her own dirty secrets. Betrayal burned like acid in his soul. "She didn't deserve it," Raul muttered, feeling a tightness in his chest. "You destroyed lives, Luiz, and mine is one of them. I had no choice, Raul." Luiz shouted suddenly, the facade of calm starting to crumble. "I was involved in something bigger than both of us. If I didn't do that, they would have killed me too. I could not allow everything to collapse." Raul approached slowly, feeling the anger and the pain pulsing in his veins. For years, he carried the weight of that unfinished case, the promise not fulfilled to Magdalene's family. Now, in the face of truth, he was destroyed in a way he never imagined. "And now, Luiz?" Raul asked, the cold voice. "Do you think this will end this? What will I just ignore everything I found out?" Luiz stared at him with eyes of those who had already lost the battle. "I know not, Raul. I know you are different from me, and that's why I'm ready to pay for what I did." Raul felt his hands shake, the adrenaline running loose in his body. But he knew Luiz was right. There was no way to go back. The man he knew was lost, and the only way ahead would be to confront the past with the full force of the law. Want to find out how Raul will solve this devastating betrayal? Share and subscribe to follow the final chapter. Chapter 6. The Last Act. The sun was born on the horizon when Raul left Luiz's house, feeling like he was leaving a nightmare that lasted years. Luiz's words still echoed in his mind, mixed with the weight of revelations. Police had already been notified, and Luiz was in custody, waiting for his final destination. But for Raul, the case was not completely closed. There was one last visit he needed to do. Magdalene's tomb was in a simple, almost forgotten cemetery. The tombstone was small, marked only with her name and the dates. Without the body, it was the only memorial that the family could build. Raul knelt before the tombstone, taking off his hat in respect. "I promised you to find the truth," he murmured, his heart heavy. "And now, finally, I know what happened. Sorry to have been so long." The cold morning wind blew around him, as if the world itself was giving a final sigh. Raul felt a restless peace, knowing that the case of Magdalene was finally resolved, but that her life would never be the same. The ghosts of betrayal, loss, and guilt would still follow him, but at least he could keep his promise. As he got up, Raul looked at the grave one last time before turning his back and walking away. There were other mysteries to solve, other promises to be fulfilled. But this time he would face the future with his eyes wide open, without blindly relying. The last call had been answered, and with that, a part of Raul could finally rest. The end. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel, like and comment on the story.